Please allow me to introduce our speaker. R.B. Drennan, Jr. is Associate Professor of Risk Management and Insurance and Chairman of the Department of Risk, Insurance, and Healthcare Management at the Fox School of Business at Temple University. He has also been designated as Fox School Dean's Distinguished Teaching Fellow. Dr. Drennan received undergraduate degrees in economics, mathematics, and biology from Southern Methodist University. He earned his master's degree and PhD in insurance and risk management from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Drennan conducts research on managed care and employee benefits and has published articles in the Journal of Insurance Regulation, the CPCU Journal, Benefits Quarterly, and the Journal of Insurance Issues. Rob, we're pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, Marty, and welcome to all those who are participating in our first webinar. Again, this is Insurance Fundamentals for Policymakers. This is sort of Insurance and Risk Management 101. The remaining 3 webinars, as you can see, are insurance coverages, property and casualty. I'll be returning in a few weeks to do insurance coverages, life and health, and then the final installment in this sequence will be insurance regulation and legislation. So the topics that I'm going to discuss today are looking at insurance basics, also looking at some economic issues related to insurance pricing. Insurance pricing is very unique. Looking at some of the characteristics of the insurance product. Insurance is a risk management tool, how it fits broadly into managing risk for most firms and organizations. And then finally, we'll have a brief discussion as to why insurance operations are regulated. So we'll look at insurance basics first. Insurance is a fundamental tool to provide economic security to firms, individuals, and organizations. And so we first have to consider an icebreaker.
Thanks, Rob. Here's some food for thought for you and for our audience today. Issues associated with these types of insurance concerns may have an impact on your constituents. And we've listed healthcare insurance, homeowners insurance, workers' compensation, and auto insurance.
So to begin our discussion, we need to sort of get some terminology out of the way. These are pretty fundamental concepts that we will be referring to throughout our webinar, throughout the remaining webinars. So first we have to define what is risk. In insurance and risk management, we deal with a type of risk known as pure risk. And pure risk really is uncertainty regarding future outcomes. And in particular, when we say pure risk, it's uncertainty regarding a loss or events which might produce a loss. So you could think about in the future there might be 2 possible states of the world. Some random event could occur and you could have a loss, or the random event does not occur and you don't have a loss. There are certainly other types of risk which involve possibility of a gain. That's called a speculative risk situation. So gambling, for example, or buying stock. Those are examples of speculative risk. Speculative risk is not an insurable risk. Pure risks, generally speaking, are insurable. And so the types of risks that we talk about in insurance and risk management are almost exclusively pure risk events. We also have this term called apparel. Apparel is defined as the immediate cause of a loss. So a fire is apparel, theft, floods, earthquakes, death, negligent acts. These are all examples of perils. They're also random events. So when they occur, when a fire occurs, there's a loss that's forthcoming. If no fire occurs, there's no loss. So the types of perils that I've mentioned to you are pure risk events. So a peril is the immediate cause of the loss. There also is something associated with insurance and risk management called a hazard. Hazards and perils are really easy to get mixed up, but they are very different. So I'll give you an example of a hazard. A drunk driver is a hazard as opposed to a driver who's not drunk. So in what sense is that a hazard? Well, anytime anyone gets behind an automobile, there's a possibility that they could get involved in an accident. If they're driving drunk, then the probability or the possibility of them getting involved in an accident is actually increased. So it increases the likelihood of a particular accident occurring. So it didn't cause the loss, but it made the peril, the accident in this case, more likely to happen. The second example of a hazard would be, let's say that you consider the distance of a structure from the nearest source of water, so a fire hydrant or firehouse. If you're right next door to a fire hydrant, if a fire occurs, then you have a reliable source of water, meaning that the fire will not be as extensive perhaps. If you're a long way from a source of water, and if a fire occurs, then the fire will go longer and the damage will be greater. So what we notice about hazards is that they don't cause losses to occur, but when we do have hazards, they increase either the frequency, or it means the probability, or they increase the dollar amount of the loss. So they don't cause losses to happen, but they increase the probability of the loss or the dollar amount that it happens. Now, hazards are important because they do affect insurance contracts, as we're going to see, and they're also an important part of how firms might manage risk in their organizations. Fundamentally, we consider losses. Losses are as a result of perils. Some losses are easily measurable. So most property losses, if there's a loss to property, for example, it's pretty easy to measure the repair cost or replacement cost. If someone dies, there's a loss of income. That's easy to measure. But if someone dies, there may also be a loss of companionship or advice. That's not so easy to measure. Typically, we think of losses in insurance and risk management that can be measured because insurance contracts deal with losses that are easily measurable, as we will see. The next two concepts are related, loss frequency and loss severity. So to give you an example here, suppose that you were buying a firm and you looked at this firm's financial statements, you looked at their balance sheet and their income statement, and on their income statement you noticed an expense item called self-insured workers' compensation losses. So of course states require, virtually every state requires firms to provide workers' compensation insurance or workers' compensation coverage for their employees who are injured on the job. Some states allow firms to self-insure, to not buy an insurance contract, to simply pay for those losses themselves. So if you were buying a firm, you're buying the assets, the liabilities, and all the risks associated with that firm. So if you were to see that self-insured workers' compensation losses was an expense item and it was $1 million, then you might want to dig further and know, well, how did we get to that $1 million figure? Did we have one workplace accident, for example, that caused someone to be severely injured and the amount of that loss is going to be $1 million? Or did we have 10 workplace accidents and each accident cost $100,000? Both examples would yield $1 million, but in terms of how you got there, it would make a big difference from a risk management perspective. So some events, some types of losses or perils are more what we call low frequency events or low probability events. Some are very, very low probability events. So a Hurricane Sandy type situation, floods are not unusual, but a Hurricane Sandy situation was a pretty low probability event. But when it happened, it caused a great deal of damage, so that would be severity. Severity is really high. So we can say that frequency is basically looking at how likely a loss is to happen, what the probability of that loss is, and then some events are lower frequency losses, some are higher frequency losses. Severity is, given I've had a loss, how much is it going to be? So obviously if I have no loss, on the profile of frequency and severity, some risk management tools, including insurance, are better suited than others, as we will see a little bit later on. So of course, insurance is a very common way of handling risk or uncertainty. And so we can see here that the definition you see on your screen perhaps is it's a means of treating risk by transferring the financial consequences of loss to a third party, and this third party is an insurance firm or insurer. And it's also a means of protecting financial interests when losses do occur. So we're going to talk a little bit later about really what is the commodity, what is it that you're buying when you buy an insurance contract. So basically what you do when you buy insurance, you recognize that random events could happen to you that could cause you to have losses, and what you're doing is you're transferring the financial responsibility of that loss to a third party called an insurer. You're not really transferring the risk per se. If you own a property, if you own a house or a building, you are subject to various what we call property loss exposures. Your property could be damaged by fire, right? You own that, so you'd be financially responsible for it. By buying an insurance contract, you still own the property. You